Some roads lead us home, and some lead us straight into the ghosts of our past. On a torrential Tuesday night, a single father pulled over to help a stranded billionaire. He thought he was just fixing a busted tire. He didn't know he was unearthing a 10-year-old heartbreak. The rain pouring down on Interstate 90 just outside of Seattle was unrelenting, turning the asphalt into a slick, treacherous mirror. It was past midnight on a Tuesday. Liam Sullivan gripped the worn steering wheel of his 2008 Chevy Silverado, his knuckles white, his eyes narrowed against the glare of oncoming headlights. He was bone-tired. At 32, Liam carried the weight of a man a decade older. Calluses lined his palms from endless shifts as an independent diesel mechanic, and the faint scent of motor oil seemed permanently etched into his skin. In the rearview mirror, he could barely make out the sleeping form of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. She was curled under a faded fleece blanket in the back seat, her soft breathing a steady rhythm against the chaotic drumming of the rain. Liam had just picked her up from his neighbor's house after pulling a grueling 14-hour double shift. All he wanted was a hot shower and his own bed. Then, the hazard lights caught his eye. A sleek, black Mercedes Maybach S-Class was parked haphazardly on the gravel shoulder, its low-profile tires sinking slightly into the mud. Steam hissed from beneath the undercarriage, illuminated by the blinking amber lights. A few feet away, sheltered only by a flimsy designer umbrella that the wind was actively trying to destroy, a woman paced. Even in the gloom, she looked entirely out of place on this desolate stretch of highway. She wore a tailored camel trench coat, her posture rigid with frustration as she shouted into a glowing smartphone. Liam sighed, easing his foot off the gas. He was exhausted, but he was also a father and a decent man. Leaving a woman stranded on a mountain pass in a storm wasn't in his DNA. He engaged his turn signal and pulled the heavy Silverado onto the shoulder, parking a safe distance behind the luxury sedan. He left the engine running and the heat blasting for Lily, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and toolbox from the passenger floorboard, and stepped out into the deluge. The freezing rain hit him instantly, soaking through his flannel shirt. He pulled his collar up and walked toward the Maybach. "Ma'am?" Liam called out over the roar of passing semi-trucks. "Need some help?" The woman spun around, dropping her umbrella slightly. The beam of Liam's flashlight caught her face. The air in Liam's lungs vanished. The storm around them seemed to mute into a dull, distant hum. It had been 10 years, 3 months, and 14 days. The math wasn't something he consciously kept track of anymore, but in that fraction of a second, his brain supplied the exact numbers with brutal precision. The woman standing before him, shivering, drenched, and staring at him with eyes as wide as saucers, was Victoria Caldwell. "Liam?" Her voice was barely a whisper, completely lost to the wind, but he read the shape of his name on her lips. He lowered the flashlight so it wasn't blinding her, his hand trembling just enough for the beam to shake against the wet asphalt. She had changed, yet she was exactly the same. The youthful, carefree girl who used to laugh in the passenger seat of his first rusted-out Honda Civic was gone. In her place stood a woman of terrifying elegance. Her features were sharper, her cheekbones more pronounced, and the soft, messy curls she used to wear were now styled into a sleek, rain-ruined bob. He knew exactly who she was now, even if they hadn't spoken in a decade. The whole world knew who she was. Victoria Caldwell wasn't just his college sweetheart anymore. She was the CEO of Caldwell Horizon, a multi-billion-dollar venture capital and tech firm. She had been on the cover of Forbes and Time. She was untouchable royalty in the corporate world, and right now, she had a blown front left tire and a shattered rim. "Victoria," Liam said, his voice coming out much colder and harder than he intended. He forced himself to break eye contact, looking down at the damaged vehicle. "Looks like you hit a piece of debris, sliced right through the sidewall and cracked the alloy." Victoria stood frozen. Her phone slipped from her grasp, dangling by a leather strap around her wrist. "I can't believe it's you," she stammered, stepping closer. The smell of her perfume, something expensive, floral, and agonizingly familiar, cut through the scent of wet pine and exhaust fumes. "Liam, what are you doing here?" "I live in the valley," he replied mechanically, setting his heavy metal toolbox down on the gravel with a thud. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to look at her. If he looked at her, the carefully constructed walls he had spent the last 10 years building would start to crack. "Where's your security detail? Your driver?" Victoria crossed her arms, shivering violently. "I gave them the weekend off. I needed to drive. I just needed to be alone. I was heading to my father's cabin in Clay Elum." "Well, you picked a hell of a night for a solo drive," Liam muttered. He knelt in the mud, completely indifferent to the expensive dirt ruining his jeans. He pulled a heavy hydraulic jack from his box. "Your car doesn't have a spare. These luxury models rarely do. They use run flats, but you've destroyed the rim. It's not going anywhere." "I called a tow," Victoria said, her voice shaking, whether from the cold or the shock of seeing him. Liam couldn't tell. "They said it would be 3 hours. There's a pile-up closer to Snoqualmie." Liam stared at the mangled wheel, then up at the dark, unforgiving sky. 3 hours out here in a dead car with temperatures dropping toward freezing. He gritted his teeth. He looked back at his warm truck, thinking of his daughter. Then he looked at the billionaire who had broken his heart into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "Get in my truck," Liam said flatly. Victoria blinked, startled. "What?" "Your battery is dead because you left the headlights and the auxiliary power running without the engine on," Liam pointed out. "You're going to freeze to death out here waiting for a tow. Get in my truck. I'll drop you at the diner a few miles up the pass. You can wait for your transport there." Victoria hesitated, her eyes searching his face for the warmth she used to know. She found none. Liam's jaw was set, his expression as unreadable as stone. "Okay," she whispered. The walk back to Liam's Silverado felt like a death march. The wind howled, pushing against them, as Victoria followed his broad, familiar shoulders. 10 years ago, she would have slipped her hand into his coat pocket to stay warm. Tonight, they were strangers, separated by an invisible chasm of time, money, and deeply buried resentments. Liam opened the passenger door of the truck for her. The cabin was a stark contrast to the storm outside, smelling of stale coffee, vanilla air freshener, and warm air. Victoria climbed in, her soaked camel coat clinging to her legs. As she settled into the worn cloth seat, she turned to thank him, but the words died in her throat. Directly behind Liam's seat, buckled into a booster seat, was a little girl with a mop of unruly brown curls. She was fast asleep, her head tilted against the window, a stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Victoria felt the breath knocked out of her all over again. A child. Liam was a father. Liam slammed the driver's door shut, sealing them inside the quiet cab. He stripped off his soaked flannel overshirt, leaving him in a tight, grease-stained thermal shirt. He tossed the wet garment onto the floorboards, seemingly unaware of Victoria's paralyzed stare. He shifted the truck into gear and carefully pulled back onto the highway, leaving the crippled Maybach behind in the darkness. For 5 miles, the only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers and the low hum of the heater. Victoria's mind was spinning out of control. She looked at Liam's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint stubble, the deep crow's feet around his eyes that hadn't been there when they were 22. "She's beautiful," Victoria said softly, breaking the suffocating silence. She didn't dare look back at the girl, keeping her eyes fixed on the dashboard. Liam's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Thanks. Her name is Lily." "How old is she?" Victoria asked, dreading the answer. She did the brutal math in her head. She had left Liam 10 years ago, dragged away by her father's manipulative ultimatum, forced to return to a world of wealth she had tried to escape. 7, Liam said. His voice was clipped. Professional. Distant. 7. That meant he had moved on. 3 years after she vanished from their cramped apartment in Portland, leaving only a cryptic note she was forced to write, he had found someone else. He had fallen in love. He had built a family. The realization twisted like a knife in Victoria's chest. All these years, sitting in boardrooms and presiding over corporate takeovers, she had held on to the naive, desperate hope that maybe, somehow, he had waited, that he understood. Is your wife at home?" Victoria asked, her voice betraying a slight tremor. Liam let out a short, humorless laugh. He kept his eyes glued to the slick road. "No, it's just me and Lily. Her mother walked out when Lily was 2. Couldn't handle the lack of money, the long hours. Decided she wanted a different life." He paused, casting a brief, piercing sideways glance at Victoria. "Seems to be a pattern with the women I fall for." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Victoria flinched as if she'd been physically struck. She closed her eyes, fighting the sudden, burning sting of tears. She deserved that. She knew exactly how it must have looked when she left. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know about the private investigators her father, Richard Caldwell, had hired. He didn't know about the threats, how her father had promised to destroy Liam's fragile contracting business, to ensure his sick mother's medical bills went unpaid if Victoria didn't return to the family empire. She had sacrificed her own happiness to protect him. And now, sitting next to him, feeling the absolute zero temperature of his resentment, she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. "Liam, about what happened?" Victoria started, her voice pleading. "You don't understand how it was. My father—" "Stop!" Liam interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't do that, Victoria. Don't sit in my truck, dripping wet, 10 years later, and try to justify why you disappeared while I was out buying an engagement ring." Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "An engagement ring?" "Yeah," Liam said, his voice cracking just a fraction before he steadied it. "I picked up extra shifts at the rail yard for 6 months to afford a terrible little diamond. Came back to our apartment to propose, and you were just gone. Just a note saying you realized you belonged in a different world. I was forced to write that," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes, mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. "Liam, my father found us. He threatened you. He threatened your mother's hospice care. I didn't have a choice." Liam hit the brakes, pulling the heavy truck hard into the empty, brightly lit parking lot of Rosie's 2-4-hour diner. The sudden deceleration caused Lily to stir in the back, murmuring softly before settling back to sleep. Liam threw the truck into park and turned fully toward Victoria. Under the harsh neon glow of the diner's sign, she saw the sheer amount of pain etched into his face. "You always had a choice, Tori," he said, using his old nickname for her, which only made it hurt more. "You could have talked to me. We could have fought him together. But you didn't trust me enough. You chose the money. You chose the safety of the Caldwell name." He reached over and popped the lock on the passenger door. "The diner is warm. They have a phone. Your tow truck can meet you here." Victoria stared at him, her heart shattering all over again. She wanted to scream, to grab him, to tell him that every dollar she made felt like ash because he wasn't there to share it. But looking into his hard, unforgiving eyes, she realized the boy she loved was gone. The man sitting beside her had been hardened by betrayal and forged by the harsh realities of single fatherhood. She reached for the door handle, her hand trembling. "I'm sorry, Liam," she whispered. "I truly am." She pushed the door open, stepping out into the freezing rain. Before she could close it, a small, sleep-heavy voice floated from the back seat. "Daddy?" "Who was the sad lady?" Victoria froze, her hand gripping the edge of the door. Liam looked back at his daughter, his entire demeanor shifting instantly from stone-cold to incredibly gentle. "Just someone who needed a lift, Bug," Liam said softly to the child. "Go back to sleep." Victoria closed the door, standing in the rain as the red taillights of the Silverado faded back onto the dark, winding highway. She was a billionaire. She controlled the fates of thousands of employees. She could buy anything on earth. Yet, standing in the puddle of a glowing neon sign, Victoria Caldwell had never felt so utterly, devastatingly bankrupt. She pulled her ruined coat tighter around herself and walked toward the diner, completely unaware that tomorrow morning, her multi-billion-dollar company was going to aggressively bid on a massive municipal development project in Seattle, a project where the lead site contractor was a fiercely independent local outfit named Sullivan and Co. The universe, it seemed, wasn't finished with them yet. The morning sun over Seattle offered no apology for the storm the night before. It reflected blindly off the glass facade of the Columbia Center, where Caldwell Horizon occupied the top 3 floors. Inside her sprawling corner office, Victoria Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a cup of untouched black coffee growing cold in her hands. She wore a charcoal Tom Ford pantsuit that functioned more like armor than clothing. To the rest of the world, she was the ice queen of venture capital, ruthless, precise, and entirely devoid of sentimentality. But beneath the silk blouse and the staggering net worth, her heart was a chaotic, bruised mess. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the harsh neon glow of Rosie's diner, the grease stains on Liam's thermal shirt, and the sleeping face of the little girl in the back seat. "Lily! Victoria? Are you listening?" The sharp, nasal voice snapped her back to reality. Sitting across her polished mahogany desk was Robert Sterling, her chief operating officer. Robert was a textbook ex-McKinsey shark, impeccably groomed, entirely devoid of empathy, and fiercely loyal to Victoria's father, Richard. Victoria blinked, turning away from the panoramic view of Puget Sound. "I'm listening. Robert. The Waterfront Revitalization Project. The City Council is leaning toward our bid, but there's a holdup." "A massive holdup," Robert corrected, tossing a thick, leather-bound dossier onto her desk. "We have the capital. We have the backing of the mayor. But the Municipal Development Board has a strict mandate for this specific zoning area. We have to retain the primary local site contractor for the foundational earthwork. It's a union thing, a community optics thing. If we don't get this contractor to sign our non-compete and absorption clause, the city walks away." "So, buy them out," Victoria said dismissively, walking back to her leather chair. "Offer them 20% over market value for their heavy machinery, Caterpillar excavators, Peterbilt, haulers, whatever they have. Pay their union dues for the next 5 years. Make it impossible for them to say no." "I tried," Robert sneered, adjusting his gold Rolex. "The owner is a stubborn, blue-collar relic. He refuses to sign the absorption clause. He says he won't let Caldwell Horizon dictate his crew's wages or strip their pensions. He's demanding a joint venture status, or he tanks the whole bid." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Joint venture status for a local earthworks company on a $2 billion corporate tech hub? It was unheard of. "Who is this guy?" "The company is called Sullivan & Co. Advanced Excavation," Robert said, checking his iPad. "We're meeting him in Conference Room A in 10 minutes. Your father is dialing in from his estate in the Hamptons. He wants this dealt with today." The name dropped into Victoria's stomach like a lead weight. Sullivan. Seattle was a massive metropolitan area, but in the world of high-stakes commercial development, it could suddenly shrink to the size of a postage stamp. Her breath hitched, but years of boardroom conditioning kept her face entirely impassive. "Set up the room," Victoria commanded, her voice perfectly level. "I'll handle Mr. Sullivan." 10 minutes later, Victoria sat at the head of a 20-foot glass table. Robert sat to her right, and a massive flat-screen monitor dominated the far wall, displaying the stern, heavily lined face of Richard Caldwell. Her father looked exactly as he had 10 years ago, imposing, aristocratic, and utterly intolerant of failure. The heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open. Victoria's heart stopped beating. Liam walked in. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit, but he commanded the room the second he crossed the threshold. He wore dark, heavy-duty denim, a crisp white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and a pair of scuffed Red Wing work boots that thudded definitively against the imported marble floor. He held a battered leather satchel. He looked rugged, exhausted, and incredibly dangerous. He didn't look at Victoria, not at first. He walked directly to the opposite end of the table and dropped his satchel. "Mr. Sullivan," Robert said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Thank you for making the drive from the dirt to the sky. I'm Robert Sterling, COO. This is our CEO, Victoria Caldwell, and our chairman, Richard Caldwell, joining us remotely." On the screen, Richard Caldwell's eyes narrowed. If the billionaire patriarch recognized the man whose life he had systematically destroyed a decade ago, he didn't show it. "Let's make this quick." Richard's voice boomed through the speakers. "Mr. Sullivan, your demands are absurd. You run a glorified sandbox operation. Sign the buyout, take the cash, and go buy yourself a fleet of new trucks." Liam finally looked up. His icy blue eyes bypassed Robert. They bypassed the screen displaying the man who had ruined his life. They locked directly onto Victoria. The air in the room instantly evaporated. The silent conversation passing between them was deafening. "You didn't know," his eyes seemed to say. "I didn't," hers pleaded back. "My operation," Liam began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down Victoria's spine, "holds the exclusive municipal permits for deep soil stabilization in the Pioneer Square district. Your architects designed a 50-story glass tower on top of a subterranean water table. Without my crew's specialized knowledge of this specific bedrock, your tower sinks into Puget Sound in a decade." He pulled a thick stack of blueprints from his satchel and tossed them down the length of the glass table. They slid and stopped perfectly in front of Victoria. "I'm not selling my company to a corporate meat grinder, so you can strip my men of their health care and replace them with cheap, non-union labor from out of state." Liam continued, his gaze never leaving Victoria's. "I keep my crew. I keep my autonomy. We operate as a joint venture, or you don't build." "You arrogant," Robert started, half standing from his chair. "Robert, sit down," Victoria snapped. The sharpness of her tone made the COO flinch and drop back into his seat. She looked at the blueprints, then back at Liam. The boy she had loved in college had been a dreamer. The man standing in front of her was a seasoned general who knew exactly how much leverage he held. He was brilliant. He was fighting for his people, for his daughter, and he was completely unfazed by the billions of dollars sitting across from him. "Mr. Sullivan," Victoria said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "a joint venture exposes Caldwell Horizon to massive liability. If your timeline slips, we bleed millions." "My timelines don't slip, Miss Caldwell," Liam countered coldly. "I work 14-hour days. I don't abandon my responsibilities when things get difficult." The double meaning struck Victoria like a physical blow. She swallowed hard, her nails digging into the palms of her hands under the table. On the screen, Richard Caldwell scoffed. "We're done here. Victoria, terminate the negotiation. We will lobby the city council to revoke his permits. We'll starve his little company out. He won't be able to lease a single bulldozer in this state by Friday." Liam's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He looked at the screen, a dark, simmering hatred burning in his eyes. But before he could speak, Victoria stood up. "No," Victoria said. The room went dead silent. Robert stared at her in shock. On the monitor, her father's face darkened into a furious scowl. "Excuse me, Victoria?" Richard demanded. "I said no, Richard," she replied, using his first name. "A severe breach of their public protocol. Sullivan & Co. has the city's backing. Lobbying will take 18 months. We don't have 18 months before the interest rates on our construction loans adjust. Mr. Sullivan wants a joint venture to protect his workers." She looked directly at Liam. "Caldwell Horizon accepts his terms." Liam looked as though he had been hit by a train. His stoic mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing absolute bewilderment. "Victoria, you are out of your mind," Robert hissed. "You can't unilaterally approve that without board." "I am the chief executive officer of this company," Victoria interrupted, her voice slicing through the room like a steel blade. "Draw up the joint venture contracts. Standard 60-40 split. Sullivan retains full operational control of the earthworks division and his union contracts." She picked up her dossier. Meeting adjourned. Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She didn't know if she had just saved Liam's livelihood or if she had just declared war on her own father. The underground parking garage of the Columbia Center was a cavernous, echoing concrete bunker. Victoria bypassed her reserved VIP elevator and practically jogged toward the exit ramps, her heels clicking rapidly. She needed air. She needed to process what she had just done. "Victoria," she froze. The heavy, unmistakable sound of Liam's boots echoed behind her. She turned to see him marching toward her, the battered leather satchel swinging at his side. The anger radiating off him was palpable, bouncing off the concrete pillars. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" Liam demanded, stopping 3 feet away. The harsh fluorescent lights cast deep shadows over his face. "Game?" Victoria echoed, genuinely taken aback. "Liam, I just gave you exactly what you asked for. I secured your business. I went against my own board." "Don't play the savior with me!" Liam snarled, stepping closer, his imposing frame forcing her to look up. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'm just some dumb grease monkey?" Victoria's brow furrowed in utter confusion. "Find out what? What are you talking about?" Liam let out a bitter, breathless laugh. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled, official-looking document, shoving it into her chest. Instinctively, Victoria grabbed it. "Read it," Liam commanded. Victoria unfolded the thick paper. It was a formal notice from Sunbelt Commercial Rentals, the largest heavy machinery leasing corporation in the Pacific Northwest. It was a notice of immediate termination, all of Sullivan & Co. His equipment, the excavators, the loaders, the trenchers, were being recalled due to a sudden, retroactive credit risk reassessment. "This was sent to my office at 8 a.m. this morning," Liam said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. 3 hours before this meeting. "Your company secretly bought a controlling stake in Sunbelt's parent holding group last month. I didn't know until my lawyer tracked the LLC shell companies this morning." Victoria stared at the document, her blood turning to ice. Caldwell Horizon didn't buy Sunbelt. She would have known. She signed off on every acquisition over $50 million, unless her father used his personal equity firm to do it off the books. "Liam, I swear to you, I didn't know about this," Victoria breathed, looking up into his furious eyes. "My father! He must have done this. He handles the shadow acquisitions." "Right," Liam sneered, stepping back, the disgust evident on his face. "Just like you didn't know 10 years ago. Just like you had no choice but to get into a limousine while I was at the hospital holding my dying mother's hand, begging the billing department for an extension because someone miraculously bought our medical debt and called it in early." The parking garage seemed to spin. Victoria felt the oxygen leave the room. "What?" she whispered, the word barely scraping past her throat. "Your mother's debt. What do you mean called in early?" Liam's expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Don't lie to me anymore, Tori. It's pathetic. Your father's lawyers showed up at the hospital. They told me if I didn't stop calling you, they would garnish my wages and seize my mother's hospice bed. You destroyed me. And now, because I wouldn't bow to your corporate machine today, you're trying to destroy my daughter's future." He snatched the termination letter back from her trembling hands. "Keep your joint venture," Liam said, turning his back on her. "I'll fight the city, I'll fight the rental agencies, and I'll fight you, but stay the hell away from me and my kid." He walked away, his boots echoing loudly into the darkness of the garage, leaving Victoria standing utterly alone. She couldn't breathe. The puzzle pieces from 10 years ago were violently snapping together, forming a picture so horrifying it made her physically nauseous. Her father hadn't just threatened Liam. He had weaponized Liam's dying mother. He had bought medical debt to use as a loaded gun against a 22-year-old kid who was just trying to survive. And he had told Victoria that Liam took a massive payoff to leave her alone. He had shown her a forged bank transfer to prove it. He lied. He destroyed both of our lives for control. Victoria didn't go back up to her office. She walked directly to her private car, slamming the door shut. She pulled out her encrypted laptop and opened a secure connection to the Caldwell family's private server, a network she had the master administrative rights to, but rarely monitored. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard firewalls, diving deep into the archived financial records of her father's private trust, Black Crown Holdings. She searched the year they broke up. She searched the name Sullivan. The screen populated with dozens of PDF files, legal invoices, and wire transfers. Victoria's first file. It was a private investigator's report, containing hundreds of photos of Liam from 10 years ago. Photos of him working at the rail yard. Photos of him visiting the jewelry store. Photos of him weeping in his truck outside the hospital. She opened the second file. It was a receipt of purchase from a predatory medical debt collection agency. Richard Caldwell had paid $150,000 to acquire the outstanding debt of Mary Sullivan. She opened the third file. It was an email thread dated from this morning. It was from Richard Caldwell to the Regional Director of Sunbelt Commercial Rentals. Subject, Sullivan & Co. Message, pull his fleet. Terminate the leases. Starve the dog until he begs. A tear slipped down Victoria's cheek, hot and stinging, dropping onto the keyboard. She had spent a decade building an empire, believing she was a powerful, independent woman, but she was just a puppet. Her father had built her a throne on the ashes of the only man she had ever truly loved. Victoria slowly closed the laptop. The sorrow and confusion that had plagued her for 10 years vanished, incinerated by a sudden, blinding rage. She wasn't just going to fix this. She wasn't just going to give Liam his company back. She was going to burn Richard Caldwell's empire to the ground, and she was going to make sure he watched it happen. Pulling her phone from her purse, she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. It belonged to the lead investigative journalist at the Seattle Times, a man who had been trying to expose Richard Caldwell's corrupt municipal dealings for a decade. "Hello, David," Victoria said, her voice eerily calm, possessing the cold precision of a sniper aligning a crosshair. "It's Victoria Caldwell. I have a story for you, and I have the server logs to prove it." The explosion didn't happen with fire or shattered glass. It happened with a 6 a.m. digital publication by the Seattle Times. The headline read, "The Architect of Ruin, How Richard Caldwell Weaponized Seattle's Working Class." By 8 a.m., the article was trending nationally. David, the lead investigative journalist, had meticulously laid out a decade of corporate extortion, illegal lobbying, and shadow acquisitions, all backed by undeniable proof. He published the wire transfers, the shell company structures, and the cruel, calculated purchase of private medical debt used to blackmail independent contractors. Victoria didn't go to the Columbia Center that morning. She sat in a quiet, unassuming coffee shop near Pike Place Market, watching the financial news networks scramble to cover the collapsing stock price of Caldwell Horizon. By 9:30 a.m., the Securities and Exchange Commission had dispatched federal agents to the Caldwell building. Robert Sterling, attempting to quietly board a flight to the Cayman Islands, was detained by federal marshals at SeaTac Airport. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Dozens of missed calls from her father, a man who was currently watching his untouchable empire disintegrate on live television. Victoria picked up the phone, slid the battery out, and dropped it into the nearest trash can. She had blown the whistle on her own legacy. She had forfeited her position, her inheritance, and her reputation in the elite corporate sphere. And for the first time in 10 years, she could finally breathe. Across town, Liam Sullivan was standing in his dusty field office, staring blankly at a cardboard box. He had spent the morning preparing to lay off 30 men. He was holding the printed termination notices when the heavy oak door of his trailer flew open. His foreman, a grizzled man named Hank, stood in the doorway, breathless and gripping a tablet. "Boss, you need to see this. Turn on the news." Liam frowned, walking over to the small television in the corner. The screen was dominated by a glaring chyron. Caldwell Horizon CEO steps down amid massive whistleblower leak. As Liam listened to the anchor detail, the leaked server files and the exposure of Richard Caldwell's predatory tactics, specifically citing the illegal sabotage of a local company named Sullivan & Co., his phone rang. It was the regional director of Sunbelt Commercial Rentals. The man was stammering, profusely apologizing, claiming a monumental administrative error, and promising that Liam's entire fleet of heavy machinery was already being transported back to his job sites, free of charge for the next 6 months. Liam hung up, his hands shaking slightly. He looked back at the television. They were showing a file photo of Victoria. She hadn't just given him his company back. She had burned her own house down to guarantee his safety. 3 weeks later, the dust in Seattle had finally begun to settle. The Pioneer Square Municipal Project had been formally handed over to a newly formed Community Development Board, with Sullivan & Co. officially contracted to lead the site work on their own terms. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unseasonably warm and bright. Liam was wiping grease from his hands with a shop towel, walking away from a massive yellow excavator, when he stopped dead in his tracks. Standing by the chain-link fence at the edge of the construction site was Victoria. She looked entirely different. The intimidating, armor-like designer suits were gone. She wore faded denim jeans, a simple white sweater, and a pair of worn canvas sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, effortless clip. She looked exactly like the 22-year-old girl who used to study at the cramped kitchen table of their Portland apartment. Liam threw the rag over his shoulder and walked toward the fence. He didn't carry the anger from the parking garage anymore. The rage had been washed away by the sheer magnitude of what she had sacrificed. "I hear they're calling you the Robin Hood of Puget Sound," Liam said, his voice quiet, stopping a few feet away from her. Victoria offered a small, sad smile. "My lawyers prefer the term cooperating federal witness, but Robin Hood sounds a bit more romantic." She reached into her canvas tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope, sliding it through a gap in the chain-link fence. "What is this?" Liam asked, taking it carefully. "It's the deed to the Sunbelt machinery fleet," Victoria said softly. "I liquidated my personal equity before the board could freeze my accounts. I bought the fleet outright. It belongs to Sullivan & Co. now. And the paperwork behind it is the official nullification of your mother's medical debt. It's wiped clean, Liam. Forever." Liam stared at the documents, a heavy lump forming in his throat. He looked up at her, seeing the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion of the past 3 weeks, but also a profound, undeniable peace. "You didn't have to destroy your whole life for this, Tori," he murmured. "It wasn't my life," she replied, her voice breaking slightly. "It was a prison my father built. I just finally found the courage to break the lock." She took a step back from the fence, shoving her hands into her pockets. "I didn't come here to ask you to forgive me, Liam. I know 10 years is too much time to just erase. I just came to pay my debts. And to tell you that I'm sorry." She turned to walk away, the afternoon sun catching the stray hairs escaping her clip. "Victoria." She stopped, turning back slowly. Liam walked over to the gate, unlatched the heavy padlock, and pushed it open. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, closing the distance between them. "Lily has a soccer game this Saturday. In the valley," he said, his voice rough but incredibly gentle. "It's just local league stuff. Nothing fancy. But I usually bring a thermos of hot chocolate." Victoria's breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the sight of the man she had never stopped loving. She nodded, a genuine, radiant smile finally breaking across her face. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd really like that." Some bridges, once burned to ash, take years of patient labor to rebuild. Victoria and Liam didn't instantly erase a decade of manipulation and heartbreak, but the toxic foundation had been cleared away. On a quiet Saturday, sharing a thermos of hot chocolate while a little girl chased a soccer ball nearby, they realized the storm was finally over. The road ahead was long, but they were finally walking it together.
Hi, my name is Shalom World Hunger, the owner and manager of Shalom World Hunger. After watching the video, single dad stops to fix millionaire CEO's car, only to discover she's his first love from years ago, I'd really like to know what you think. How did the story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the emotional mix of nostalgia, regret, and unexpected reconnection. There's something powerful about two people crossing paths again after life has changed them in completely different ways. The single dad stopping to help without knowing who was inside the car made the moment feel genuine because it came from kindness first, not status or recognition. Do you think the reunion brought back more happiness or more unfinished pain from the past? And have you ever met someone again after years apart and realized the connection never fully disappeared? I think stories like this remind us that life can surprise us when we least expect it, and sometimes small moments of kindness can reopen doors we thought were closed forever. If this story connected with you emotionally, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, second chances, and unexpected reunions, feel free to like and subscribe, only if you'd like to see more.